When he was kicked out of the system on his 18th birthday, the only thing he owned was a black trash bag full of clothes and a key to a dusty auto shop he never knew existed. What he discovered inside wouldn't just change his life, it would rewrite his entire past. And if you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, I need you to listen to this. Hit that subscribe button, because this is a story about what happens when you're given a second chance you never saw coming. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist as a problem for the state of Illinois. It didn't feel like a birthday. It felt like an eviction. Janice, the house supervisor at Northwood Group Home for Boys, stood in the doorway of my room, arms crossed. Her expression was the same one she used for everything: clogged sinks, fistfights, bad report cards, a sort of weary institutional patience that had long ago curdled into simple indifference. "Leo," she said, her voice flat, "bus ticket is on the counter. Your bag has to be by the door in 10 minutes. She wasn't being cruel. It was just a procedure. For the past 6 years, my life had been a series of procedures. Wake-up procedure, mealtime procedure, lights-out procedure. Now the final one, the aging-out procedure. I looked around the small room. A twin bed with a thin mattress, a metal desk bolted to the floor, a single window that looked out onto a brick wall. This box had been my world since I was 12, since the accident. I'd never thought of it as home, not really. It was just the place I returned to. But now, faced with leaving it, a strange, hollow ache opened up in my chest. It was the fear of the unknown, vast and cold. I grabbed the black trash bag I'd packed. 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts, a hoodie, a worn paperback I'd read a dozen times. Everything I owned fit into a single bag, the kind you put out on the curb. It felt appropriate. I slung it over my shoulder. The plastic crinkled, a cheap and lonely sound. In the hallway, the other boys, the ones who weren't 18 yet, watched me with a mixture of envy and fear. They saw freedom. I saw a cliff edge. Downstairs, Janice handed me a manila envelope. Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, and $300 in cash. Severance pay, I thought, with a flicker of dry humor that died instantly. "That's it," she said. "Your caseworker, Mr. Henderson, said to tell you good luck." Good luck. Like a handshake at the end of a game. I didn't know where I was going. A shelter, probably. I'd find a job washing dishes, rent a room somewhere. The story of 1,000 kids just like me. But then Janice added, "Oh, and this came for you. A lawyer called yesterday. Said it was urgent." She handed me a different envelope, a crisp, heavy one made of thick, cream-colored paper. It felt alien in my hand, like something from another world. My name was typed on the front, Leo Vance. Below it, an address for a law firm downtown. I tore it open. The letter inside was short and formal. It requested my presence at the offices of Sterling and Croft at 10 a.m. regarding the estate of my paternal grandfather, Arthur Vance. My grandfather. I barely remembered him. A vague image of a tall, quiet man with grease-stained hands from a single visit when I was 5 or 6. My dad's father. After my parents died in the car crash, he just disappeared. The story I was always told by social workers was that he wanted nothing to do with me, that he blamed my father for the accident and couldn't bear to look at his son's son. It was a simple, cruel story, and after a while, I'd learned to live with it. It was just another scar. The bus ticket Janice had mentioned was for a bus that went across town to a homeless shelter. But this letter, This was a detour, a completely unexpected turn. A part of me wanted to throw it away, to stick to the plan I didn't have. It was safer to expect nothing. Hope was a dangerous thing for a kid like me. It was the one thing that could still really hurt you. But I looked at the black trash bag in my hand, and then at the heavy, important-feeling envelope. My entire life was in that bag. Maybe, just maybe, there was something else. I walked out the front door of Northwood Group Home without looking back. The air outside was cold, biting with a late autumn chill. It tasted like freedom, and it tasted like fear. I didn't go to the bus stop for the shelter. I went to the one that headed downtown. The law office was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Dark wood, leather chairs that sighed when you sat in them, a quiet that felt expensive. The receptionist looked at my hoodie and worn jeans with a polite, practiced lack of judgment. I was led to a conference room on the top floor. A wall of glass looked out over the entire city. From up here, the streets I'd just walked looked like tiny, insignificant lines on a map. A man in a tailored suit stood to greet me. He was older, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. "Leo," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Robert Davies. I was your grandfather's attorney." I shook his hand. My own felt rough and out of place in his smooth, dry grip. "I don't understand," I said. It was all I could manage. "My grandfather. I was told he wanted nothing to do with me." Mr. Davies gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." He waited until I did, then sat opposite me at the long, polished table. He slid a folder across the surface. "Arthur passed away 2 weeks ago, Leo. I'm very sorry for your loss." The words didn't register at first. How can you lose something you never had? I felt a strange emptiness, a hollow echo where grief should have been. "He had a heart condition," Mr. Davies continued softly. "He knew his time was limited. He spent the last year getting his affairs in order." He opened the folder. Arthur wasn't a wealthy man, not by traditional standards. He didn't have stocks or a large savings account. He had one asset, an auto repair shop and the small plot of land it sits on in a town called Kepler's Hollow. He owned it outright, and he left it and everything in it to you. I stared at him. An auto shop. The image of the man with grease-stained hands flashed in my mind again. "Why?" I asked, the word barely a whisper. "Why me? He hated me." Mr. Davies met my gaze. There was a deep sympathy in his eyes, but also something else, a professional restraint. "The will is very clear, Leo. You are his sole heir, but there are complications." Of course there were. "The property has several years of back taxes owed," he said, pulling out a sheaf of papers filled with figures that made my head spin. "A significant amount. You'll have 90 days to pay them, or the county will seize the property and auction it off." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. 90 days. I had $300 to my name. It was an impossible situation. A gift that wasn't a gift at all. It was a burden. "Furthermore," he said, his tone becoming graver, "a development corporation, Viridian Group, has been trying to acquire the land for some time. It's located near a proposed highway expansion. They know about the tax delinquency. They've already made a formal offer." He slid another paper across the table. It was a letter of intent from Viridian Group. They were offering to buy the property as is, pay off all the back taxes, and give me a check for $50,000. $50,000. The number was so large it seemed unreal. It was more money than I could possibly imagine. It was a new life, a clean slate, an apartment, clothes that didn't come from a donation bin, a future. "This is a very generous offer, Leo," Mr. Davies said, his voice carefully neutral. "For a property in that condition, with that much tax debt, it's more than fair. All you have to do is sign, and you can walk away from all of this, free and clear." Free and clear. The words were tempting, so tempting. I could take the money and never look back. Forget Kepler's Hollow. Forget the grandfather who abandoned me. Forget the dusty, debt-ridden garage. It was the smart move, the logical move. It was the easy way out. But something held me back. A flicker of stubbornness, maybe, or just plain curiosity. Why would a man who supposedly hated me leave me his only possession? Why would he leave it to me in a state where I was almost guaranteed to lose it? Unless he knew about the offer from Viridian. Was this his final, cruel joke? Leaving me a choice between a pile of debt and a payout for a place I'd never seen? "What's in the shop?" I asked. Mr. Davies blinked, surprised by the question. "I'm not sure. Arthur's personal effects, I assume. Tools, equipment. It's been closed for almost a year. He asked that it be sealed upon his death until you could be contacted." Sealed. The word hung in the air. "I want to see it," I said. The words surprised me as much as they did him. "Before I decide anything, I want to see it." Mr. Davies studied me for a long moment. He seemed to be looking for something, and whatever he found made him nod slowly. "I think," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips, "that's what Arthur would have wanted." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, old-fashioned iron key attached to a simple brass tag. The tag was stamped with a number, 14. He pushed it across the table. It felt heavy in my palm, solid, real. "The bus to Kepler's Hollow leaves from the main terminal at 2 o'clock, he said. "It's about a 3-hour ride. I've taken the liberty of purchasing you a ticket." He handed me another envelope. "The shop is on the edge of town. You can't miss it. My number is on my card. Call me when you've made a decision." I stood up, the key clutched in my hand. $50,000 was a fortune. It was a ticket to a new life. But this key was a mystery. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than fear or numbness. I felt a pull, a reason to go somewhere. I left the gleaming office tower and my black trash bag, which the receptionist had politely stored in a closet, and walked toward the bus terminal. The city felt different now. It wasn't just a place to survive anymore. It was a place I was leaving. The bus ride was a slow transition from one world to another. The concrete and glass of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to flat, endless farmland stretching out under a vast gray sky. The highway hummed, a monotonous drone that vibrated through my seat. I watched the world go by, my reflection a faint ghost in the window. I kept thinking about the choice. $50,000. I could walk into any town, rent an apartment, buy a car. I could be anonymous. I could be new. No one would know I was the boy from the group home, the boy with the dead parents, the boy who owned nothing but the clothes on his back. That was one path. The other path led to a place called Kepler's Hollow, to a dusty, derelict garage, to a mountain of debt and the ghost of a grandfather I didn't know. It was the harder path, the uncertain path, the one that made no logical sense. But the iron key was still heavy in my pocket. It was a question that demanded an answer. As the hours passed, the landscape began to change again. The flat fields gave way to rolling hills and dense patches of forest. The towns we passed through grew smaller, the buildings older. The bus slowed, its air brakes hissing, and the driver called out, "Kepler's Hollow." I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, leaving me in a profound silence, broken only by the rustling of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. The town was small, smaller than I'd imagined. A single main street with a handful of storefronts, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, a post office, a bar. The buildings were old brick, their facades weathered by time and seasons. It felt like a place that time had largely forgotten. There was no one on the street. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to sink, casting long, deep shadows. A cold wind swept down the street, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. I felt like an intruder, a foreigner. I pulled Mr. Davies's instructions from my pocket. "Edge of town, can't miss it." I started walking, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. I passed the last of the houses, and the road curved. And then I saw it. It stood alone, set back from the road, surrounded by a cracked and weed-choked asphalt lot. Vance Auto and Repair. The letters were painted on the side of the brick building in what was once a cheerful blue, now faded and peeling. It was a simple, solid-looking structure. Two large garage bay doors, their windows clouded with years of grime. A smaller door to the side, probably the office entrance. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. The whole place looked tired, like it had finally given up. This was it. This was my inheritance. A wave of disappointment washed over me, cold and bitter. It looked exactly like what it was, a worthless, abandoned building. $50,000. The number pulsed in my mind. I could get back on the next bus, call Mr. Davies, and be done with this, done with the past. But I had come all this way. I walked across the lot, the weeds crunching under my feet. I stood before the small office door. The paint was peeling, revealing layers of older colors beneath. I pulled the key from my pocket. The brass tag was cool against my skin. I hesitated. This was the point of no return. Once I opened this door, I was stepping into his world, into the mystery. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the key into the lock. It was stiff, resistant. I had to jiggle it, put my shoulder into the door. With a loud, groaning complaint from the rusted hinges, the lock turned. The door swung inward, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out was thick and stale. It smelled of cold metal, old oil, dust, and something else. Something that smelled like time itself. For a long moment, I just stood there on the threshold, peering into the gloom. Then, I took a step inside. The door creaked shut behind me, and the world went dark. My heart hammered in my chest. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers brushing against cold, grimy plaster until they found a light switch. I flipped it. Nothing. The power was off, of course. I pulled out my phone, its screen a startlingly bright beacon in the oppressive darkness. I turned on the flashlight, and the beam cut a narrow, dancing path through the air, illuminating a universe of floating dust motes. I was in a small, cramped office. A large metal desk dominated the space, its surface buried under a thick blanket of dust. Behind it, a wooden chair. A filing cabinet stood against one wall, its drawers slightly ajar. Calendars from 5 years ago were still tacked to a corkboard, the pages curled and yellowed. The flashlight beam moved across the room, catching on details. A coffee mug with a faded logo, a stack of old invoices held together by a rusty paperclip. A spider web, intricate and abandoned, stretched from the corner of the desk to a silent black telephone. It was a perfect time capsule. A life paused. I stepped further in, my boots scuffing on the gritty floor. I ran my hand over the desk, leaving a clean streak in the gray dust. It felt like touching an archaeological find, a relic from a forgotten civilization. My civilization, I guess. I tried the drawers of the desk. They were all unlocked, but mostly empty. Old pens that had long since dried up. Crumpled receipts. A dog-eared manual for a Ford Falcon. The bottom drawer, however, was locked. I pulled on it, but it wouldn't budge. It was a simple lock, the kind you could probably pick with a paperclip, but it held firm. I shone the light around the desk again, looking for a key. Under the blotter, in the pen holder, on the dusty shelves behind the desk. Nothing. I moved out of the office and into the main garage area. The space was cavernous. The flashlight beam seemed small and inadequate, swallowed by the high ceilings and deep shadows. The air here was even heavier, with the smell of grease and solvent. 2 vehicle lifts stood like skeletal giants in the center of the room. A massive red toolbox, the size of a small car, was pushed against the far wall. Tools still hung on a pegboard, wrenches and sockets arranged in neat, orderly rows, each one outlined in white paint so you knew exactly where it belonged. Everything was covered in the same thick, uniform layer of dust. It was like a fresh snowfall, muffling all sound, preserving everything exactly as it was left. My grandfather, Arthur, had been a tidy man, an organized man. Even in abandonment, there was a sense of order. I walked the perimeter of the garage, my light tracing over workbenches cluttered with mysterious, inert machinery. An engine hoist stood in a corner, its chain dangling like a hangman's noose. I felt a strange sense of reverence. This was his space. This was where he had spent his days. The man who was a ghost to me had been real here. He had worked here, moved here, breathed this air. I could almost feel the echo of him, the ghost of a presence. The thought was unsettling. I went back to the big red toolbox. It was a machinist's chest, with dozens of shallow drawers. I started opening them, one by one. The drawers slid out with a smooth, well-oiled sound, a strange contrast to the decay around them. Inside, more tools. Calipers, micrometers, precision instruments, all nestled in custom-cut foam. Each one clean, rust-free, and in its proper place. This wasn't just a collection of tools. This was a life's work, a passion. And as I slid open a small drawer near the bottom, my light glinted off something that wasn't a tool. It was a small brass key, much smaller than the key to the front door. It was attached to a thin leather fob. I pulled it out. It looked like a key for a desk or a cabinet. My heart quickened. I took the key back into the dark office. My hands were trembling slightly as I knelt by the big metal desk. I pushed the key into the lock on the bottom drawer. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. I took a breath and pulled the drawer open. It didn't contain more tools or receipts. It contained a single object, a metal lockbox, the kind you use for cash or important documents. It wasn't locked. I lifted it out and set it on the dusty surface of the desk. It was heavy, solid. This was it. This had to be it. The reason. The answer. My phone's flashlight beam wobbled as I undid the latch and slowly, carefully, lifted the lid. Inside, there were two things. On top was a thick stack of letters, bundled together with a simple rubber band. Beneath them, something else. Something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a photograph. A faded Polaroid of a young man and woman, smiling, leaning against an old pickup truck. The man had his arm around the woman, and they were both laughing, squinting in the bright sun. The man looked familiar. He had my eyes, my father. And the woman, beautiful and happy, was my mother. I had seen pictures of them before, but only small, formal ones from the files the state kept. I'd never seen them like this, alive, carefree, young. A wave of grief, so sudden and so powerful it felt like a physical blow, knocked the air out of my lungs. I hadn't let myself feel this in years. I had packed it away, buried it under a shell of indifference because it was too heavy to carry. But now, in this dusty, silent room, it all came rushing back. I sank into the old wooden chair, the springs groaning in protest. I just sat there for a long time, the photo in my hand, the silence of the garage pressing in on me. I finally set the photo down gently on the desk and picked up the stack of letters. They were all in the same plain white envelopes, addressed simply to Leo. There was no stamp, no postmark. They were meant to be found, not mailed. The handwriting was a strong, slightly slanted script. The top letter had a single word written on it. Start. My hands were shaking. I slid my finger under the flap and broke the seal. The paper inside was crisp. I unfolded it and began to read, the narrow beam of my phone's light illuminating the words. Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means you are 18. I'm sorry. That's the first thing I need to say. I am sorry for not being there. I am sorry for the silence. I know what you were told, that I blamed your father, my son, for the accident, that I wanted nothing to do with you. It was a lie, a necessary one, but it was the greatest regret of my life. I had to stop and read that part again. A lie. My whole life, the foundation of my own story, the story of the unwanted boy, was built on that one simple, cruel fact. And he was telling me it was a lie. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. A lie? He let me grow up in homes believing that, believing I was so worthless my own grandfather couldn't stand the sight of me. I wanted to crumple the letter, to throw the box against the wall. But I kept reading. My anger was a fragile shield against the hope that was starting to bloom, terrifyingly, in my chest. Your father was a good man, Leo. He had a good heart. But he was reckless, and he fell in with the wrong people before he met your mother. He borrowed money from a man he shouldn't have, a loan shark, a dangerous man named Silas Richter. When he and your mother got together, he tried to break away, to build a clean life. He was paying the debt back, but it was the kind of debt that never really gets paid. There was always more interest, more fees, more threats. My blood ran cold. I had never heard any of this. The official story was just a car crash, an accident on a wet road, simple, tragic. The night of the accident, the letter continued, and the handwriting here was shakier. They weren't just going for a drive, they were running. Richter's men had been to the house. They were threatening your mother. Your father was trying to get you both away, to start over somewhere else. You were in the back seat, in your car seat. The police report said another car ran them off the road. It wasn't another car. It was Richter's men. They made it look like an accident. They got away with it. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was shrinking, the darkness pressing in. It wasn't an accident. It was a murder, and I was there. I found out later from one of your dad's old friends. By then it was too late. You were in the system. Richter knew about you. He came to see me. He made it clear that if I tried to take you in, if I brought any attention to myself or to you, the debt would be transferred. He would come for you. He told me the only way you'd be safe is if you were invisible, a ward of the state, a nobody, no family to attach to, no one to come looking. The letter fell from my hands. It fluttered to the dusty floor. I leaned forward, my head in my hands, the flashlight on my phone creating a stark, lonely circle of light on the ground. He hadn't abandoned me. He had protected me. The story of him hating me, of him wanting nothing to do with me. He had created that story. He had sacrificed his own name, his own memory, to make me invisible, to keep me safe from a monster I never knew existed. I started to cry. Not loud, sobbing cries, but silent, hot tears that tracked clean paths through the grime on my face. I cried for the parents I barely remembered, murdered on a dark road. I cried for the little boy in the back seat who survived. I cried for the grandfather who had to live with the world thinking he was a monster, all to protect a grandson he couldn't know. And I cried for the 18-year-old boy sitting in the dark, whose entire world had just been shattered and rebuilt in the span of 10 minutes. I sat there for what felt like hours, the cold of the room seeping into my bones. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, aching grief. And beneath that grief, something else, a connection, a bond with the ghost in this garage, forged through his words. This place wasn't just an abandoned building anymore. It was a sanctuary. It was the last piece of him, of them. Eventually, the tears stopped. I was just cold and empty. I looked at the phone in my hand. The battery was at 15%. I thought about the $50,000 offer from Viridian Group. It was still there, the easy way out. I could take the money and run, disappear. It was what my father had tried to do. It was, in a way, what my grandfather had done for me. But running felt wrong now. It felt like a betrayal. I picked up the letter from the floor, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the box with the photograph. There were other letters in the stack, more to the story. What was I supposed to do now? Sell this place, this monument to his sacrifice, to a faceless corporation for a quick payout? The thought made me feel sick. This place was all I had left of him, of my family. But what was the alternative? The taxes were real. The debt was real. I had $300 and a dying phone. It was an impossible situation. I felt a wave of despair so heavy it was almost physical. I was just a kid. I didn't know how to fight a development company. I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't even know how to fix a car. My grandfather had saved my life only to leave me with a puzzle I couldn't solve. And it's in moments like that, isn't it? When you're at your absolute lowest, sitting in the dark, with no clear path forward. If you've made it this far in the story, maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've faced a choice that felt impossible, where every option seemed wrong. I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here is for people who get it. People who have had to fight for their second chances. If this is hitting home for you, take a second and hit that like button. Let me know you're here. And drop a comment down below if you've ever had to make a choice that defined everything that came after. I read every single one. Because these stories, our stories, they matter. Now let's get back to the dark and what I found next. I must have fallen asleep in that chair because I woke up to a jarringly bright light stabbing through the grimy office window. It was morning. My neck was stiff and my whole body ached from the cold. My phone was dead. The silence in the garage was absolute. In the daylight, the place looked even more forlorn. The dust wasn't a mysterious shroud anymore, just a thick layer of filth. The reality of my situation came crashing down. I was in a town I didn't know, with no money, no communication, and an impossible problem. The despair from the night before returned. I opened the lockbox again and just stared at the remaining letters. What was the point? What other painful truths were waiting in there? What good would it do? I was about to close the lid when my eyes caught something I hadn't noticed in the dark. In the bottom of the box, underneath where the letters had been, there was a false bottom. A thin piece of metal, slightly raised on one edge. My fingers fumbled with it, prying it up. It came loose, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment underneath. And inside that compartment was another letter and a small, heavy canvas bank bag. I pulled out the letter first. The handwriting was the same. "Leo," it said, "this is the important part. This is the choice. The money from Viridian is real. I knew they'd come sniffing around. It's the easy path. $50,000 is a lot of money. You can take it and build a new life, and no one, least of all me, would blame you. It's more than your father and I ever had starting out. It is a way out." He was giving me his blessing to sell, to take the easy path. But the letter wasn't finished. "But there is another path, the harder one, the one I hope you'll choose. This place, this garage, it's not much, but it's yours. It's real. It's something to build on. In the bag is $32,000 in cash. I saved it, every spare dollar for the last 10 years. It's not a fortune. It's not 50 grand. But it's enough. It's enough to pay the back taxes. It's enough to get the power turned on. It's enough to buy food and supplies for a few months. It's a fighting chance." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I set it down and unzipped the canvas bag. Inside were thick, tight bundles of $100 bills. It was real. $32,000. He had saved this for me. Starved himself, probably. Lived like a hermit. All for this. For me. For this choice. The letter had one last paragraph. "The choice is yours, son. Walk away with their money or stay and fight with mine. One path is a paycheck. The other is a home. I know what I'd do, but I'm not you. Whatever you choose, know that I was proud of you before I even knew you. Your father would be too. Love, Arthur, your grandfather." I stared at the cash, then at the letter, then at the faded photo of my parents. A paycheck or a home? Run or fight? The choice was so clear it was like a bell ringing in the silent garage. There was no choice at all, not really. I wasn't going to sell my grandfather's sacrifice. I wasn't going to sell the only home I'd ever been given. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. A surge of energy, of purpose shot through me. The exhaustion, the cold, the despair, it all vanished, burned away by this newfound resolve. I had a mission now. I zipped up the bag of cash, put it carefully back in the lockbox along with the letters, and found the deadbolt on the inside of the office door. I wasn't leaving this here. I took the lockbox and walked out into the main garage. The space didn't look derelict anymore. It looked like potential. It looked like work. Hard work. But it was my work. I found a grimy bathroom in the back with a functioning toilet and a sink that dripped rusty water. I splashed my face, the cold water a welcome shock. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. The kid looking back at me was still the same kid from the group home. Thin, tired, wary. But his eyes were different. There was a fire in them now. My first priority was the taxes. I had the cash, but I couldn't just walk into the county office with a bag full of hundreds. I needed to find a bank, and I needed to find Mr. Davies. I had to walk the mile back into the center of town. It felt different this time. I wasn't an intruder anymore. I was a resident. Sort of. The diner was open. The sign said, Marge's Place. I went inside, the lockbox held tight under my arm. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was overwhelming. A woman with a kind, tired face and a cloud of white hair stood behind the counter. "Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Coffee?" "Please," I said, my voice hoarse. I sat at the counter. She put a thick mug in front of me and filled it. The warmth seeped into my hands. "And a phone book?" I asked. She slid it across the counter. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. "Not really," I said. "I'm staying out at the old Vance place." Her expression softened. She stopped wiping the counter and looked at me. "Arthur's place? I heard he passed. I'm Marge. Arthur used to come in here for coffee every morning, sat right where you're sitting. Quiet man. Good man. Are you family?" "His grandson," I said. The words felt good to say out loud, solid. "Leo." A real smile spread across her face. "Well, I'll be. He talked about you sometimes. Said he had a grandson in the city he hoped would come home someday." My throat tightened. He talked about me. "Breakfast is on the house, Leo," she said, turning to the grill. "Welcome to Kepler's Hollow." I ate the best plate of eggs and bacon I'd ever had in my life. I found the number for the county tax office and the local power company in the phone book. I used Marge's phone to call Mr. Davies. I told him my decision. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure, Leo?" he asked, his voice full of caution. "This is the harder road." "I'm sure," I said. I could hear the smile in his voice when he replied. "All right, good. I'll contact Viridian Group and formally reject their offer. I'll also see what I can do to negotiate a payment plan for the taxes, buy you some time. But you need to show them you're serious. Get the power on. Start cleaning the place up." After the call, I felt 100 pounds lighter. The decision was made. The first steps were taken. I paid Marge for the call, despite her protests, and she told me where the bank and the county office were. The rest of the day was a blur of errands. Depositing a chunk of the cash into a new bank account felt surreal. The teller looked at the bundled hundreds with suspicion until I explained the situation. Then I went to the county office, a small brick building next to the post office. I paid a significant portion of the back taxes, enough to get them to halt the seizure proceedings. The clerk was surprised but stamped my receipt. My last stop was the power company. I paid the deposit and the outstanding balance. They said they'd send a truck out to reconnect the service tomorrow. As I walked back to the garage in the late afternoon, the lockbox feeling considerably lighter, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize slowed as it passed me. The window rolled down. The man inside was wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in this town. He had a slick, predatory smile. "You must be Leo Vance," he said. His voice was smooth as oil. "I'm Mark Stoller from the Viridian Group." I stopped walking. I just looked at him. "I heard you rejected our offer," he said, his smile tightening just a fraction. "A mistake. That property is a teardown. The offer we made was a gift. It expires in 48 hours. After that, we'll just wait for the county to take it. We'll buy it at auction for a fraction of the price. Think about it, kid." He didn't wait for a reply. The window slid up, and the SUV sped off, leaving a cloud of dust. The threat was clear. They weren't going to make this easy. They thought I was just some dumb kid they could scare off. They were wrong. They didn't know about Arthur. They didn't know about the letters. They didn't know that I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. I was fighting for my family. That night, I slept on a pile of old blankets in the office, the lockbox as my pillow. It was cold and uncomfortable, but it was the best sleep I'd had in my entire life. The next morning, the power came on. I flipped the switch in the office, and a single, naked bulb flickered to life, casting a pale yellow glow over the room. It felt like a miracle. I spent the next week in a frenzy of work. The first task was cleaning. I bought supplies from the hardware store in town: buckets, mops, trash bags, a shop vac. The owner, a gruff man named Hank, gave me a contractor's discount when he heard I was Arthur's grandson. "Your granddad was a good customer," he'd grunted. "Kept this town's cars running for 40 years. Good to see the lights on out there again." I filled dozens of trash bags with old newspapers, empty oil cans, and years of accumulated junk. I swept and vacuumed every square inch of the garage, the shop vac roaring as it sucked up mountains of dust and grime. With every patch of clean floor I uncovered, the place felt more and more like mine. I found more traces of my grandfather everywhere. A faded photo of my dad as a teenager, proudly holding a wrench tacked to the inside of a locker. A collection of old rock and roll cassettes by the workbench. A half-finished crossword puzzle left on a clipboard. These small discoveries were like breadcrumbs, leading me closer to the man I never knew. One evening, exhausted and covered in grease, I decided to read another letter. I sat in the office, under the single bare bulb, and pulled the next one from the stack. "Leo," it began, "if you've made it this far, it means you stayed. I knew you would. You have your father's heart, but you have your mother's stubbornness. It's a good combination. Now, about the business. It's not a gold mine. It never was. But it's honest work. The people in this town are good people. They'll be wary of you at first. They don't know you. You have to earn their trust, the same way I did." The letter went on to detail the basics of the business: which suppliers to trust, which customers always paid late. He explained the quirks of the old hydraulic lift and where he kept the spare parts for the compressor. It was a manual, a guide to running this place, written by the only expert there was. And then he wrote something that made me stop. "You don't know how to fix cars, son. I know that. I can't teach you that in a letter. But I taught your father, and before I did, I made him take the engine of my old Ford pickup apart, piece by piece, and put it back together again. 3 times, until he could do it in his sleep. That truck is still out back, under a tarp. The keys are hanging on the pegboard. If you want to earn this place, really earn it, that's your first job. Make it run." I went to the pegboard, and there, hanging on a nail behind a giant pipe wrench, was a set of keys on a simple ring. I took them and went to the back door of the garage. Outside, under a rotting blue tarp, was the hulking shape of an old truck. I pulled the tarp off. It was a Ford F-100 from the 60s, its paint faded to a dull patina of rust and sky blue. It was beautiful. I opened the driver's door, the hinges groaning in protest. The cab smelled of old vinyl and mice. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. Nothing. Not a click, not a groan. The battery was long dead. This was it. My test. My inheritance wasn't just the building or the money. It was this truck. It was the challenge. The next day, I started. I used the money my grandfather left to buy a set of manuals for the truck. I spent my days cleaning the shop and my nights reading, studying diagrams of carburetors and wiring harnesses, the words blurring in front of my eyes. Then I opened the hood and just stared. It was a terrifying maze of wires, hoses, and greasy metal. I had no idea where to begin. But my grandfather's letter was in my pocket. I could feel the weight of it. Piece by piece, he had written. So that's what I did. I started small, the battery, then the spark plugs. I labeled every wire, took pictures with the new phone I'd bought, and laid every part out on a clean workbench, just like the outlines on his pegboard. Days turned into weeks. Marge from the diner would bring me sandwiches sometimes. Hank from the hardware store would drop by to see my progress, offering gruff, cryptic advice. "Check your points gap," he'd say, before turning and leaving. The town was watching me, testing me. I got another letter from Viridian Group. Their offer was now $30,000. The next one would be lower, they promised. I used it to wipe grease off my hands and threw it away. I was so focused, so deep in the guts of that engine, that I almost didn't hear the tow truck pull into the lot one afternoon. A big man with a weathered face and a friendly smile got out. "You Leo?" he asked. I nodded, wiping my hands on a rag. "I'm Gus. I run the tow service in town. Your granddad and we did a lot of business together. Listen, I got a call. Car broke down out on Route 4. Simple flat tire, but the woman's an elder, can't change it herself. I'm swamped today. Wondering if you could give me a hand. I'll pay you for your time." It wasn't a test, it was an invitation. "Yeah," I said, a smile breaking across my face. "Yeah, I can do that." I grabbed a floor jack and a lug wrench from the shop, my grandfather's tools. They felt right in my hands. I rode with Gus out to the stranded car. Changing the tire was easy, but it felt momentous. It was the first real work I'd done, the first time I had helped someone. When I got back to the shop, I felt a new sense of confidence. I went back to the Ford's engine. I worked late into the night, cleaning the carburetor, setting the timing, running new wires. And finally, the moment came. Everything was back together. I reconnected the new battery. I got in the cab, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The engine sputtered. It coughed. It whined. And then, with a deafening roar, it turned over. It caught. It idled, rough at first, then smoothing out into a low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the whole garage. I just sat there, my hands on the steering wheel, and I laughed. It was a loud, joyful, unfamiliar sound. I had done it. The truck was running. I had passed the test. That night, I read the last letter. It was shorter than the others. "Leo, if you are reading this, the truck is running. I don't need to tell you what to do next. This place is yours now. Not because I gave it to you, but because you've earned it. There's one last thing in the desk, a gift for your first real customer. Don't ever forget where you came from, son, but never let it hold you back. Your life is your own. Build a good one. I went to the desk. I had cleared it off, but I hadn't gone through the last of the small drawers. In the back of one, I found a small flat box. Inside was a brand new, beautifully crafted sign made of carved and painted wood. It said, "Vance and Son Auto Repair." I held it in my hands, tears blurring the words. Vance and Son. He had always planned for this. He had always had faith in me. The next morning, I hung the new sign out front, right below the old faded one. It looked perfect. I spent the last of the cash on a few more essential tools and a fresh coat of blue paint for the bay doors. The work was hard, the days were long, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I wasn't just a kid from the system anymore. I was a business owner. I was a mechanic. I was Arthur Vance's grandson. My first official customer was Marge. Her old station wagon was making a funny noise. It took me 2 days, with help from the manuals and a phone call to Hank, but I figured it out. A worn-out wheel bearing. When I gave her the bill, she paid it, and then slid a $100 bill across the counter. "That's for you," she said. "Your grandfather's first customer paid him with a $100 bill. He kept it in his wallet for 40 years. He said it was for luck." I looked at the bill in my hand. I thought about my grandfather's final letter. A gift for the first customer. I slid it back to her. "The first one's on the house, Marge," I said. The look on her face was all the payment I needed. The story doesn't end there, of course. Viridian Group didn't just give up. They tried other tactics, reporting me for phantom code violations, trying to bury me in paperwork. But they underestimated me, and they underestimated Kepler's Hollow. Mr. Davies helped me with the legal side. Gus sent me towing jobs. Hank gave me advice and credit. Marge told everyone in town that Arthur's grandson was a good kid who did good work. The community, the one my grandfather told me I had to earn, started to close ranks around me. I wasn't just the new kid anymore. I was one of them. I started to build a life. It wasn't an easy life. There were days I was so tired and broke, I thought about that $50,000 and wondered if I'd made a mistake. But then I'd look at the sign, Vance and Son, and I'd feel the weight of my grandfather's tools in my hands, and I'd know I was on the right path. This garage is more than just a building. It's a legacy of a love I never knew I had. It's a monument to a sacrifice that saved my life. My grandfather didn't just leave me a pile of bricks and debt. He left me a choice. He left me a challenge. He left me a home. And that's a lesson that I think we can all take something from. Life is going to knock you down. It's going to tell you you're worthless. It's going to offer you the easy way out. But the easy path isn't always the right one. Sometimes the hardest road, the one that requires you to fight, to build, to earn your place, is the one that leads you right where you need to be. It's the one that leads you home. So if you've been through it, if you've ever had to choose the harder right over the easier wrong, I see you. This channel is for you. Subscribe and become part of this community. And share your story in the comments. Tell me about the choice that changed your life. Because every story of resilience is a light in the dark. And we need more of those. Thank you for listening.